Hey, we are here with Phil Lynch, CEO of Media of Manchester United. Hey, Phil, it's been a while. It's great to see you. You're in England.
In England, great to see you as well, Drew. It's been too long.
Yeah, amazing opportunity. I know it's been a few years since we've talked, but just give us a brief introduction and kind of your day to day on the job, and maybe just briefly how you ended up in Manchester, doing this great job.
Sure. So I'll start with the second question first, because it's always kind of about the career development and the career path. But as you and I met, I spent about 10 years at Sony Pictures building out their digital businesses. Got a phone call to go over to work at Yahoo, which from my perspective is really interesting from a sports perspective.
Sure.
So I went over, spent about 2 years at Yahoo as we were wrapping up the acquisition to Verizon. And right at the end of that, I got the call from Manchester United, which for me, being a football soccer fan my whole life, was a very attractive brand. And, went through the process and was lucky enough to get it. So loaded up the wife and the 2 children. And here we are in Manchester, England, 4 years later. So it's been a great experience, but, really, just a bit surprised, I'd have to admit. I knew how big the brand was, but the global brand, 1.1 billion fans, it's truly phenomenal. So it keeps me very busy. And then I think to the first question, my title is CEO Media. I think it's a bit of a strange title, just given kind of a football world, but what it really means is that I oversee all of our direct-to-consumer initiatives. So that could be our website, our mobile application, which is the most popular mobile application in the world of sport right now. We have a 24/7 linear television network that's distributed both linearly as well as direct-to-consumer. Our social media presence, so about 180 million social media followers globally at this point. Our CRM business, our e-commerce business, and then things like match day publications and club photography. So fairly broad scope, but everything that touches the fan is probably the best way to identify it.
Well, that's great. And I'm telling you right now, I'm going to come over for a Liverpool match in the fall.
Oh, nice. Would love to host you. That'd be fantastic.
No, that's great. Well, there's so much I want to talk to you about, Phil. So let's jump right in. This is, like, from my perspective, like a dream job. So I'm sitting here green with envy as I'm asking you these questions as well. Well, maybe a good place to start is, when you first got that call and they were talking about the job, and then you started to interview there, what was the, from management's perspective and those that brought you on board, what was it that they wanted to do? What was sort of your mission and your charge as you arrived at the club?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's fairly publicized wide in news media today, giving some of the ancillary discussions. But I think what is happening, and I think United was very early to recognize this, given the size of the fan base, is that you have a lot of these traditional football clubs that, given their size of their brand and their fan base, and the ability of these fans to just truly want to interact with their club outside of the 90 minutes of the match,
right,
they really wanted to build kind of this direct-to-consumer business to kind of engage and build the fan base overall. And I think that the main remit, it's a very interesting remit, but it's all about growing reach and engagement. So from my perspective, we have a very large commercial business, which is mostly driven by sponsorship. But I spend all my time just literally looking at overall reach and engagement. And if I can kind of draw those, if I can build that business overall, which is difficult when you got 1.1 billion fans, how do you continue to grow that? But in theory, it's all about the consumer, all about the fan experience, trying to make it as seamless as possible, and knowing that in the future, the revenue and those opportunities will come. So I think United, noticed that opportunity rather early, and obviously we're willing to commit and invest in that sort of business moving forward. And then I think, luckily for me, I think that they wanted somebody that had probably done this a little bit in the past. So again, I think the experience at Sony Pictures and Yahoo made a lot of sense. And I think ultimately, with such a big fan base and a lot of work going through social media platforms, they obviously wanted an individual that had a lot of contacts with headquarters, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening and a lot of people you work with. Despite us being a global brand, we tend to go through local offices. So it's a matter of trying to tie back to the headquarters, which is where all the product roadmap and all of the decisions and all due respect are being made out of headquarters.
Gotcha. No, that's great. And you know, the title of this event, the rejoinder, is the Great Consumer Reset. So while I want to dig into 2021 and beyond with you, but certainly I want to set some context too, just in terms of talk to me about the last year. I mean, you know, plus it's been difficult. Obviously, it's been particularly difficult for any sort of live events, people in stands, sports, right? So we know what's been happening. But how did you approach it? And as we got into the pandemic and it looked like it was going to be a bit of a long haul, what became your priorities in regards to staying engaged with your fans? Did it give you a little more time to think about investing in the new product or platform innovation? But tell me how you sort of managed through the last, you know, 12, 16 months, and maybe if, you know, at the end of that, a secondary question would be, what about the consumer do you think has changed in terms of the consumer of your media and your product? Not so much maybe the fan in the stands, but so that two-part question, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, you know, I think overall it took everybody by surprise, right? It's unprecedented and nobody was ready for this. But I think the positive is those that were managing through it used it as a forcing function to make change. I think the first thing, to be fair to the club, we have about 1,000 employees, and we have a very, very, very passionate local fan base in the UK, and we are very engaged with the local audience, basically through our foundation.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, despite we have all of these employees, right, we weren't selling tickets. You know, we have stewards that weren't hosting matches, and effectively within a day or two, the entire club just completely shifted to CSR. It wasn't very difficult for us to make that change, and we received a lot of plaudits and a lot of recognition for it. So there were things like, I think we dished out over 100,000 meals to the local community.
Wow.
We provided balls and activity packs to a lot of the underprivileged children in the area. We did a lot of virtual meetups with some of our players, and we had some of our older legends and some of our players call some of our older season ticket holders.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because we shifted and we became a lot more community focused, because ultimately, to be fair, I think we view it as an obligation.
Sure.
And then I think kind of what happened from there was you kind of get more and more steam, and the narrative started being really well and really positive around us. I think, so that's kind of the CSR angle. And again, I think, you know, the club deserves a lot of credit because of all the support we provided. But then also, we never took advantage of any furlough schemes. We never laid off any employees. And that's a very difficult business decision to make when some of your business and your most fairly large lucrative part of your business isn't functioning properly for a year and a half.
Right.
So we made a lot of really hard, difficult changes and decisions, but ultimately made it so that everybody continued to really work hard and do things that were right for the community. And I think, to the second question a little bit, when you get out of the CSR side,
yeah,
then you need to shift over to kind of the business operations, and we all have to kind of punch through this, and through time we will get there. And I think that was very interesting. So I think, as part of your earlier question, why did they bring on a man with kind of my background and my experience? One of the first things I did, obviously, was did a lot of transition to things into the cloud, right? So if you think about our media team, we support 4 teams. It's not just the men's first team. We have a women's first team, we have an under 23s, and we have an under 18s. So during a time like a pandemic, 4 different training grounds. At the beginning, there wasn't any football. So we needed to figure out, how do we stay engaged with the fan base? How do we put new process in place with our players? How do we shoot content from their gardens? How do we do Zoom interviews? There's obviously a lot of education and hard lifting that has to happen around that. And then ultimately, I think we were in a very unique position because of the work we did before, of being able to edit and publish videos on the fly without having access to kind of, you know, the network through the office. So a lot of work. And then I'd be remiss not to mention it, but we have launched a new partner by the name of TeamViewer, and we did leverage a lot of their services. So they allowed us to kind of do cloud-based editing, a little bit of AI in terms of how we were kind of creating content. So, you know, a lot of it's about sharing files, and as you can imagine, it's about quick to publishing, right? Something like highlights go very quickly now, so we have to try to be first. So it was just really trying to leverage technology, which requires investment. And then another example I would give you: at first there wasn't football, so then all of a sudden we returned to playing football, but obviously because of COVID restrictions, you can't have a lot of people within that bubble of the players. So what we did in that initial 6 phase is at the training facility, we created a lot of manless cameras. So now we were able to take training, do player interviews by not having anybody physically on site. But obviously a huge step forward. And I think, you know, if you look through, I know we're still in the pandemic, but throughout this period, the club got a lot of plaudits for the success we did. But I think operationally, I think it's extremely fair to say we're exiting the pandemic stronger than we were going into it. So we used it as an opportunity and a forcing function.
That's great. And kudos to you. I know there was a really nice article in the Daily Mail recognizing you guys as daily lockdown champions. So, and a lot about your community efforts during the pandemic. So congratulations for that. And that's—
Thank you. And that is a full team effort. And I can't say enough about the amazing work that our foundation does as well.
That was a great story to read. So shifting a little bit to present day, you know, this sort of broader DTC universe is very interesting. You have your app, you have the streaming, you know, it must be great to have that direct relationship with the customer. Streaming, why don't we just kind of start with streaming and you know, you can comment or not, just in terms maybe more industry wide. Obviously the big news about, you know, Warner Media and Discovery coming together, and, you know, if that didn't cement that we're in a streaming world, in addition to I know we have about 120 streaming networks to include the niche networks just in the US. So streaming is clearly here. Talk to us about your sort of streaming assets, and as we get out of this pandemic and get back to full force, what your priorities are. But what does your sort of streaming landscape and your platform look like? Who are you reaching? And then, you know, if you want to comment on the landscape more generally, that's great. And then what are your priorities moving forward?
Yeah, I'll start with the landscape and the market overall. And I think, you know, obviously personally, it's something that I'm very, very excited about, right? And I think if you think back, Drew, for the 10 years or so we've known each other, I was building streaming video networks before anybody was talking. You know, the old saying, founders get shot, settlers get rich. But I was definitely one of the founders in the early streaming network world. So it's you know, you want to pat yourself on the back and say, you know what, I knew I was always on to something. It just took us a while to get there.
Well, I've been doing the Digital Transformation Summit for 9 years, so it's like it's finally happening. So
yeah, exactly. So no, I think it's very exciting. I think there's obviously, I think some of the businesses and the news that you referenced, I think some of it is a forcing function. I think people are understanding the infrastructure plus where they make their money, and the example you gave. There's a lot of money and margin to be made on broadband and internet connection. So I think companies are taking control of their destiny and obviously probably bringing down their content costs, which at the same time, everybody's a winner because it allows either the publishers to go direct to consumer and or self-retail, right? Which allows to control that billing industry in some instances. So I think, you know, no surprise based on the comment we just had, I'm very bullish. I think, you know, the business that I inherited when I moved here about 4 years ago was very heavily focused on social media. I think that's the big numbers. That's the big, you know, hey, this is it. And you think about kind of the race between Real Madrid, Barcelona, and ourselves. But I worked very, very hard on kind of reasons and the education internally as to why we needed to build an O&O strategy. So, you know, for me, it's all about leveraging, you know, you want to fish where the fish are, but you have to push everybody back into your O&O products. And that's because the data will power your business. So we have, in terms of a lot of our kind of editorial articles and our video that produce, you know, our web and our app are the home for that. We have a lot of functionality around things like game predictions, player of the month. We actually do man of the match voting on our apps as well, which then ties to kind of broadcast. But MUTV is interesting. So that's a 24/7 linear network that is distributed, I believe, in over 200 countries linearly. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we really started to push the gas pedal of delivering that direct to consumer. So at first that was through Google Play and iOS. Yeah. And now ultimately for the last maybe 2 or 3 years, really starting to build that audience through kind of the connected TV platforms and the game consoles.
So I was going to ask you, so for that linear network, for that streaming network, you started really mainly with the app stores, the native app, and then now you've expanded it out into connected TV and wherever you can get that sort of application on board, you're there or looking to be there. And I'm in different countries as well, right? You know.
Exactly right, and I think we localized in 19 different languages,
Wow.
which is quite a Herculean effort as well. But no, we are a lot about distribution, and I think where I like to focus, I think distribution is absolutely paramount. However, what becomes very important is kind of your windowing strategy, and for me, it's all about the O&O. It's about getting people to come back. It's about creating that. It's a value exchange of, we provide exclusive content or exclusive access. So we leverage, all of the social media networks, but, and we provide video and streaming videos through them. But I think in theory, maybe, if we did a shorter version of highlights on a social platform, but a deeper version of highlights on the O&O platform. So we do really try to raise that boat for our O&O, but distribution is absolutely paramount. And I think, when you're looking at a club like United, you want to put your club content out there, because if you don't, somebody else will fill the void, right? And I think ultimately, to your point about doing this for 9 years, where I find it very interesting, I think the market is truly there now, is I think a lot of the football clubs or the sports clubs used to look at each other. And I think there's now a solid understanding of that's not the competition. The competition is a function of time. Right. So if Drew or Bob or Phil has 15 minutes to do something, how do I get them to engage with my products versus even a Netflix or an Amazon Prime? Sure. Or linear television, right? So it's about kind of expanding it, not from a publisher side, but from a function of time.
And I imagine, I imagine it also lets you, or enables you, or empowers you to at least try to turn fans maybe into super fans, right? By giving them all this great content that they can access from anywhere around the world, right? I mean, is that how you see it? Is it about, we have this global fan base, but obviously how really into it, people are varies. I could be a super fan, I can be a fan, I can be a casual fan. Is overall this also about, sort of elevating people into from casual fan to fan, from maybe fan to super fan, and you see the benefits of that, whether it's through commerce, whether it's through engagement, or is there a overarching sort of goal of the broader streaming sort of O&O and 24/7 contact and reach effort?
There is. So you made me think of something, and I think ultimately I'll get to that. But the other reason that I didn't talk to earlier is exactly what you're saying about super fans or even passive fans. Again, to me, based on the data I've seen, that's another reason why I wanted to prioritize O&O versus social. So if you look at the normal football fan, he follows 4 teams. If you look at any football club social stream, it's completely obvious that there's fans of other clubs following that team, right? That creates a lot of this noise. And if you look across the mutual followings, Manchester United is a large portion of a lot of the other clubs' followers as well. They follow both clubs. So again, you want to get into that core base. I think to your point about the super fans, the passives, we look at everything kind of across 7 cohorts. And I think if you look at the cohort, I'm on the left, is nothing's more important. You change your wife, you change your job, you never change your football club, right? I mean, and that's generation and generation and generation of and I mean this in a positive way, the hardcore fans, right? Like that, yeah. And we all know how that is in the NFL. And then I think if you go all the way down to cohort 7, you have either maybe typically a little bit older, but some younger, where I think some of these guys, they like football, but they haven't picked a team yet. And I think what's very interesting to me is when you think about cohort 1, that team is passed down generation to generation through success, through failure. It's just, that's who you support. So your dad supported, that's who you're going to support. I think what you're starting to see because of the way people consume media now is a lot of this younger generation. One is they're not watching full games, right? So they want to watch the highlights. So they want to see the goals. And that's why when you go out on a Saturday morning, you see everybody trying to dribble everybody. Yeah. Because they're only watching the highlights. They're not watching the 90 minutes of how the plays develop. Yeah. But what is interesting is you start to see this younger generation has a lot more affiliation with the players than the teams. And I think Cristiano Ronaldo is a great example of that, right? Where he has a massive following. He changed teams. Team B got a lot of new followers, right? Rather than, I think, historically, and certainly in the American way, when a player leaves the team, you no longer support that player, but you stick with your team.
Right.
But I think that's very interesting. But I think the reason I raised those cohorts is because not only geographically and age-wise, but depending on where you fall on that spectrum, you should be spoken to differently. Same topic of conversation, but different narratives.
And then speaking of the players, I mean, certainly, you want to be careful when you're having a conversation with one of your star players, keep it friendly. But do you encourage them, and are they proactive, or is there encouragement in terms of their own social platforms, in terms of for the club? Because I imagine that can be incredible reach and engagement. So how do you work with the players in terms of them being your own social ambassadors?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is tricky, right? And I think what you can see now is football in general did that social media blackout due to racism and hatred. And I spend a lot of time doing social listening and trying to protect our players. I think in a lot of cases, I think people forget that these are kids, right? Like in most cases, they're between 17 and maybe 25 years old.
Amazing.
And I think ultimately there was a trend where I think a lot of the players looked at social as kind of probably an easy moneymaker, but now I think they're starting to realize how difficult it can be, whether that be racism or hatred or how you get it out. So we spend a lot of time training our players, trying to educate them on kind of different sensitivities. I think there's a lot of cultural sensitivities, particularly if you think about South America and England and the US.
Yeah.
Do people slip through the cracks at times? Yes, we tend to start quite a bit at the academy level.
Yeah.
So, I think we have a very well-known academy. And just being a realist, there's a lot of kids in the academy that aren't going to be professional soccer players, even though they happen to be the best at what they do now. So we very much look at it as it's our obligation to make them better individuals by the time they leave the club than when they started. And a lot of that's media training. We put cameras on them because they might be pundits one day. Mm-hmm. So we do spend a lot of time, but there still are issues at times, right? I think some of them have been very well documented, but I think there are ways, and as we typically work a lot more with the agents, but certainly if you get that dynamic right, these players can certainly amplify and help put out a lot of additional kind of messages and engagement as well.
Right. And I know when you came in, as long as we're talking about social, that, you wanted to prioritize over to sort of O&O and the direct stuff. But social obviously still critically important. So just looking at social, not so much in the context of maybe feeding, amplifying, or supporting the direct relationship in regards to the content and the linear TV or the linear programming. What's your sort of just view on social? And maybe if you can walk us just quickly through the platforms maybe and how you see each of them working differently, a Facebook versus an Insta. Is TikTok now on your radar, Twitter and Snap? And maybe what's that overarching, especially as you come in out of the pandemic into a new season in the fall, what are your thoughts on social and how you're going to leverage it to reach all of those cohorts and just keep that brand engagement global?
It's another very good question. And I think ultimately what you see a lot of is and it's the reason you're asking it, is people just bucket social into social.
Right.
And we do look at it very differently. So Twitter for us, and I think this is probably the same, everybody understands this, to us, that's now, that's breaking news, that's, so in terms of relevancy and quickness, we go there for kind of the news breaking. I think, to be fair, with the way the Twitter sphere works, that's also the place where we see a lot of discrimination, hatred, right. And we do most of our social listening there because that tends to be the platform that trends very high in terms of those less than stellar topics. I think when you look at Instagram, obviously it's about kind of moments. We bring back a lot of history. We do a goal of the day there, kind of brings back a little bit more, but a little bit more fun. We have a little bit more flexibility with our voice and tone. So we have a mood board for kind of each one of these platforms. I think Twitter's probably a little bit more breaking news, more serious. Talk about Instagram. I think Facebook's probably kind of in between the two. Obviously, I think obviously closely tied with Instagram, but I think TikTok's been phenomenal. So we've been on TikTok for about in 6 months, we just crossed 2 million followers, which was
Wow.
the fastest growing sports channel. And that's something that we're having a lot of fun with. And I think ultimately, when you're publishing as a club and you're particularly going to cohort one, it needs to be about history, players, a little bit more serious, right? That mood board tends to be a little bit more authentic.
Right.
When you go to a TikTok, you're now talking about cohort 7,
Yeah.
which is younger, more fun. So in all honesty, I think TikTok's great because it allows us to leverage content that probably would be on the editing floor.
Right.
Because it wouldn't be right for O&O or maybe a more news traditional distribution, but it allows us to get eyeballs, and frankly, some of the engagement on this stuff is unbelievable. So the team has really enjoyed it, but I do think it's different. And then I think it's also, we haven't talked about any of the Chinese networks as well too. So that's an added complexity too, in terms of, we work with a lot of local agencies in kind of region, just to kind of make sure that we get the right tone of voice, the right sensitivity, those sort of things. Because you obviously don't want to offend anybody.
Do you see, going back to TikTok briefly, and say the difference, let's say, between like that and let's just say an Instagram? Is Instagram for you more, and I'm going to use some old terms, sort of more push, where you're creating the content, pushing it out, and Instagram, obviously, it's usually sort of highly stylized content, very, high quality things. Things want to look good on Instagram, right? That's kind of the whole point of the whole thing, right? But with TikTok, it's empowering creators, right? So is that something that you see TikTok as the younger fans? It's not so much you pushing content at them, it's them creating content with their imagination and being creators and creating cool united types of videos and things.
I do, and I think what's the important piece of there is I think we can learn from them, right? So you get more traditional media people like us, and and we all kind of go down that one path of more. I mean, I spent 10 years at a movie studio, right? It's all about premium content. It's all about storytelling. It's all about narrative. But right, we're children think differently than we think now, and frankly, they're not wrong, right? So I think it's about taking a step back and observing exactly what you said about influencers, and I think they're ultimately creating new formats, right? I think when a lot of this happened with YouTube, it was just shorter formats or lesser, this is completely new formats, new learning. And I think we spend a lot of time studying influencers there just to see kind of how they're portraying themselves, but then also how they're creating content. But yeah, I do agree with what you just said.
That's great. Look, I know you got to run. I just wanted to touch quickly, a little bit mundane, I suppose, to end, but on data, you talked about one of the huge advantages was the data side in terms of this direct relationship with the customer, everything you wanted to achieve when you came into the job. How are you managing and leveraging all this data that you're getting from all these different platforms and then optimizing it? And I suppose you have your cohorts as a foundation for that.
Yeah, and I think we have, might get the number wrong, but it's somewhere around, I think, 36 different analytics tools that are kind of pumping into all different kind of AI and Tableau systems to kind of pull the insights from. But I think ultimately, it was the first thing that I focused on when I came to this business. So within the first year, I probably doubled the size of the analytics business. Over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, we transitioned the CRM business to my media team. And that makes sense because, again, as you talked about the migration of football clubs, I think historically CRM was a function of selling tickets, right? And I think now CRM, that's not what CRM is. CRM is about just managing your customers, personalization, right time, right offer, right piece of content, right place, right individual. So over that, we've not only doubled the analytics team, we've increased a lot of our services. We've also hired a new head of CRM that we brought over from PlayStation. And then I also just hired a new chief marketing officer, which is the first time the club's had a chief marketing officer. Is
that right?
Yeah. So a lot of investment. And I think, that is the shift of just really trying to understand, to your point. I think a lot of sports clubs, given the way it was done through linear broadcasting, it was always one to many.
Yeah.
But now the opportunity is one to one, and that does require investment. And again, with the pandemic, I know not everybody has the opportunity to invest, but I think if you can do the education, and I give the owners and the board at United a lot of credit for seeing where the future lies. But yeah, we've made a lot of HR personnel changes and then a lot of investments in terms of the infrastructure as well.
And how do you further optimize with those 36 different systems? I mean, is that one of your priorities to try to either narrow that to a smaller number, to have tools that are going to take all of this data and more efficiently process it, or what's next for you in terms of your own sort of data innovation and managing it?
Yeah, I think where we are now is we have a lot of tools to bring it in. We leverage a tool called Agora right now, actually, that kind of allows us to use Tableau and BI and pull it all kind of together. But I think kind of the biggest issue, and I think this is now the next phase of the evolution, is I think it's interrogating the data, understanding the data to help you test, learn, make decisions, make mistakes. And I think, you know, probably like a lot of people, we have a ton of data now. We've done a really good job of now understanding what's happening, but now I think we got to start looking at the data because it is very different, right? Things in Indonesia are very different than the UK, which is very different than China, which is very different than Nigeria.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we'll be able to have one global strategy everywhere. It's kind of, you know, think globally, act locally, I think, to some extent. And I think that's evidenced by something like MUTV, right, which is a premium pay-for-television network. That pops in certain territories, not in others. How do we then still figure out how to get that content out? Maybe it's behind a registration wall. But I think it's more about the insights now. I think we check the box. We have all the data.
Yep.
Now what are we going to do with it? That'll be kind of the next 6 to 9 months.
That's great. Other than that, as this will be the final question, 30 seconds or less, because I know you got to go. Sorry for keeping you here. You know, streaming, social, everything that you're doing, which is super exciting stuff. I'm excited for you, as you can tell. You know, as you look at the fall when the big season comes back, you know, what's top of your radar that you're most excited about sort of investing further in? Your platforms, you know, could be a technology, it could be a broader trend in the industry, but what is really on your radar where you look back at the end of 2021 and you say, yeah, I'm really glad I did this. This is cool stuff. This helps the brand. This drives revenue. This makes me excited. What's on the top of the radar for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's what I refer to as the middle, right? And I think it's about marrying the physical and the digital experiences. So if you just bear with me for a minute, I think this was, and just for those listening, the only reason I have to go is we have a match day today. I could talk you through forever, and I have to get down to the stadium. But I think ultimately sports are in a very interesting spot right now where I think it could be argued that the fan experience is better on the couch than it is in the stadia, because you don't know in some stadiums what's going on with VAR. You don't know who's hurt, what's wrong with them, where you have the commentators providing that information to you on the couch. And I think, again, if you look at our global audience, right, 99% of them are never going to be able to make it to Old Trafford. So we've just launched an experience center in Beijing. We'll be launching probably another 5 or 6, which is basically allowing us to take Old Trafford to Beijing. And a lot of AR, VR, trophy rooms, museum, that sort of stuff. Awesome. But I refer to it as the middle of really ultimately trying to use digital to supplement and make a better match day experience, but then also the reverse, right? Bringing the match day experience to those globally that will never be able to go to Manchester United. So there's a lot of work to be done there, but that's one that I'm very excited about. And I think whoever can win the marrying of the physical and the digital space in the sports space, I think it's going to be in a very, very unique position.
That's great. Well, look, I know you got to run first match in how many days now?
About 423 days or something like
423. Wow. Man, it's been a time. I'm glad looks like we're getting on the other side. Again, I'm so thrilled for you, Phil. It's great when good people get great jobs. So I couldn't be more happy for you, and I look forward to tilting back a couple adult beverages there in. At the stadium, at the pitch.
Hopefully sooner rather than later, but I appreciate the opportunity and always good to see you, Drew. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Hope to see you soon in person.
Okay, we'll see you soon. All right, bye-bye.